welcome Steve Myers.
Thank you. I really am thrilled to be here. I came from Miami to be here. Did stop at Lake Tahoe for vacation first. I get so much out of speaking to students like yourself. I want to encourage you as we go through my presentation to feel free to ask questions. I only ask that you speak up. I'm a two-time Air Force veteran, pilot, 6,200 hours, 12 jet type ratings, one of my incarnations. I've flown everything from an F-16 to a Boeing 777. I have hearing issues. Okay, so if you want me to understand what you're saying, speak up. You'll find I'll be coming up to you. If you raise your hand, I'll walk towards you to make sure that I can hear you clearly. This is my 29th presentation to this class, and I thank Steve very much for inviting me back. He keeps doing it. I keep changing it because as time goes along, my perspective on what's happened in my life changes. So I'm here to share with you today kind of the latest and greatest about what I think about what's happened in my life. A little bit about who I am. I founded, as you'll learn, an international management consulting company that over 25 years did $1 billion in revenue, employed some 5,000 people, and was the largest provider of the services it provided in the world. I also founded the second Russian-American joint venture after the end of the Cold War. Tremendous story. I could end up spending, easily I could outdo Lloyd with 200 charts, but we're not going to get that finished by 120. But you'll hear a little bit about that. I founded and ran a business jet management company with $100 million worth of assets. I founded a private equity investment company that's made 100 investments. I've sat on a dozen public and private company boards, coached CEOs. I'm a published author. I do a lot of writing and more public speaking. Just a little bit of a lead-in, what I might know about entrepreneurship. What I have found is that out of all of that experience, what really matters in succeeding or failing as an entrepreneur? How could I take all of that experience and boil that down and say something to you that's relevant to what you're looking ahead at in your life that will really be relevant to you? And I think it really comes down to this one chart. And the rest of my presentation is built around walking you through this thesis. And it works like this. It's your nature that is the key to everything. You are not going to be a successful entrepreneur if you cannot summon up the courage that you're going to need to push through the uncertainties inherent in entrepreneurship. It's as simple as that. You'll never push the button. You'll never make the right decision at the right time without courage. So the real question is, where are you going to get it? What is it? How do you channel it? Secondly, opportunity recognition can't happen if you're not prepared. All of the opportunities that are going to exist are disruptors, are discontinuities. They're things that if they were easy, somebody else has already done it. So you're going to have to recognize something that others don't see. That's not going to be easy. That's going to take a lot of knowledge on your part. I think the number one reason that people fail in entrepreneurship is that they're not prepared. We're going to talk about preparation. Third, you don't exist in a vacuum. We live in a world that's in a constant state of flux. And the macroeconomic environment is going to determine whether it's even possible to succeed or not. There's a reason all those entrepreneurs came out of the United States. The economic environment in the United States facilitated that. There's a lot of places in the world where entrepreneurship just simply can't happen. It can't thrive. But even if you see an opportunity isn't the same as knowing what you're going to do about it. That's where the inspiration part comes in, and that's the hardest part. What's your better idea? Okay, great, there's an opportunity, but what are you going to do that's really going to move the needle? Why is anybody going to care? And then lastly, there's timing. As Stephen suggested, that timing is a very personal thing. You may be in a position where you can't take advantage of that timing to take the necessary action, or it may be perfect timing. So what I'm going to do is walk you through my story about the first business that I founded, using this as the template to get you there. Okay? Sound like fun? So my story starts at the bottom of a mountain crevasse where at 20 years old I was left for dead. Now, I do not suggest to you that that is a really good way for you to learn about courage. I recommend anything but that. First off, the fall should have killed me. I should have died of suffocation. I should have died of, from bleeding, from shock and exposure. It was, just think, unsurvivable experience. Absolutely unsurvivable. But I did survive. And that's what I want to talk to you about, is why I survived. I wrote a book, best-selling Amazon book called Crosswinds. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. There's a great vignette in that book about this experience. We don't have time for me to tell you how I fell in, which is a great story, how I got out, which is even a better story, and is inspiring, to be sure. But what I learned is something you can all use. Okay? I can see some of you look absolutely stunned. How did I survive? You'll have to read about it. Here's what I learned. I presume you'd like to know that. Optimism is absolutely the key. Without optimism, I would have died for sure. I, a few years after this experience, met a gentleman by the name of Fernando Parada. I don't think any of you recognize the name, but he wrote a book called Alive. He was the captain of the Uruguayan soccer team that crashed in the Andes. Remember that story? He was the guy that walked out. Now, when he started out, he was like 6'2" and 220 pounds, and when he got down into Chile, he weighed 120 pounds. Okay? He and I had a fantastic opportunity to talk about our experiences together, and we had so much in common. I used to be 6'2" and weighed 222. So, never. So here was what was interesting about his experience, because it was a shared experience with a bunch of other people, and I was alone at the bottom of that crevasse. There was nobody to help me, nobody coming to save me. 3 days later, I ran into the Rangers on their way back up the mountain on horseback with a body bag to recover my body. Okay, as I was hobbling down the side of the mountain. He was with a whole bunch of people. He told me something very interesting. Every pessimist died. Every pessimist died. They gave up. A lot of the optimists died too. The optimists survived, the optimists that survived were able to summon the courage to push through the uncertainty of that situation. They wouldn't give up. And that's exactly what happened to me. I wouldn't give up. No matter what ridiculous, insurmountable obstacle I faced, my response wasn't, well, I can't do that. It's, well, if that's what I have to do, I guess that's what it's going to be. Now, maybe I should tell you, at the bottom of that crevasse, I had a fractured pelvis, I had a compound fracture of my right arm, and I climbed out of that crevasse. So you can do extraordinary things if you can summon the courage to overcome the fear that you're feeling. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't terrified in that crevasse. Anyone would have been. The issue isn't whether you're afraid, it's whether you can summon the courage you're going to need to push through it. Now, as dramatic as that sounds, that's the same situation you're going to face in entrepreneurship. You will not be able to push the button without the courage to push through it, because you're not going to have all the answers, and you're going to be afraid. And the reason you're going to be afraid is you got everything on the line. When I pushed the button, I had a wife, a small child, I had a second one on the way, I was 6 figures in debt. There was a lot of risk. It's hard to make those kinds of decisions in that kind of situation. How am I doing so far? Okay, so you like what you're hearing. So to say I had a rocky path of preparation, I'm sorry for the pun, but I can't help it. Right in the middle of my preparation path was that little sojourn into the crevasse. But I want to back up and tell you briefly a little bit about my childhood. Stephen already kind of described it. You know, I was born to a 19-year-old unwed mother. I lived in a one-room apartment with her and my Belarus immigrant grandfather, who didn't speak English, till I was 5. I had an abusive stepfather, okay, and by the time I was 17, I was a train wreck. I'll bet there's nobody in this class that's going to admit that they had a lower grade point average than 1.65. Okay? There was only one answer for me. It was the military. You know, I lucked into the Air Force instead of getting drafted. And, but it's an interesting experience being in the Air Force. Any veterans in the room? We have a couple, fantastic. Where did you guys serve?
Marines.
How about you?
Army.
Fantastic. Well, I was in the Air Force. Things are always beautiful in the Air Force, blue skies or bunkers. So thank you for your service. The military is a tremendous thing. It's a great equalizer. They don't care where you came from. They don't care about your problems. They don't care about your issues. You're going to conform. You're going to comply, and you're going to get your act together. They reparent you. They teach you self-reliance. They teach you how to learn. And most importantly, in my case, they gave me something that was invaluable for the rest of my life, which is the gift of competence. I went from being a D-plus student in high school at 17 when I went into the Air Force. At 20, I was the shift supervisor on the largest computer system in the world at that time. This was the NORAD system before they built Cheyenne Mountain. The computer was the size of this building. I turned out to be first-rate electronic technician, tremendous aptitude for electronics. When I got out of the military, I worked. I ended up in junior college. I went to LA Valley College over here, whichever way that is, must be that way, and was summa cum laude. Okay, I applied to Stanford. I got in. It was the only school I applied to. How about that idea? I just didn't apply anywhere else because I was going to go to Stanford. That was my vision. And I went up. I had a meeting with the Dean of Admissions and the Dean of the School of Engineering. That was it. Got my ticket punched. Got a full boat scholarship. I wanted to go back into the Air Force. I wanted to be a test pilot. I wanted to be an astronaut. Sally Ride was my classmate. I was going to say my roommate, but that's not true. She was my classmate, very good friends. My timing was bad. I went to pilot training school. About the time I'm getting out of pilot training school, the Vietnam War is over. All of these guys are coming back from Vietnam with chests full of medals, a lot of combat time. I'm not going to get a gig, right? They're going to Edwards, I'm not. I had to get out. And then I started working in aerospace and defense. I ended up doing a lot of jobs in that career. I was an engineer, I was a project manager, I was a systems engineer, a program manager, a director of this, a vice president of that, did all that in 7 years. And then the phone call came. But I want to tell you about something before that phone call. I want to talk about the macroeconomic environment. This looks pretty much like I think things are today, right? Political upheaval, economic instability, inflation, blah, 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 right? This all looks like our world. I love the student debt. Wages can't keep up. It's actually the 1970s. So we are right now today living in a situation that is almost identical to the situation I was in the 1970s. Now, that's terrifying because if it is the same, we're at the front end of it, but I don't think it'll play out the same. But this is where the opportunity is going to come. So right now, we don't know how any of these things are going to play out, but I'll tell you what it was like for me in the 1970s. We had 6 presidents in 18 years. We had 9.2% inflation for 9 years. Can you imagine what that was like? That's why I had 7 jobs. I couldn't stay in a job. I had to change jobs in order to make more money, in order to put food on the table for my family. Okay, by the time I got to the end of the 1970s, I was 6 figures in debt, okay, and hanging on by my fingernails. It was like that the entire decade. The part that you guys haven't heard about is the part about the gas lines, okay? OPEC, he knows what I'm talking about. I couldn't get enough fuel into my gas tank to get to work. They were gas rationing. The price of fuel had quadrupled, okay? I caught a guy siphoning the gas out of my car. It was a disaster. That was anything but the time for an entrepreneurial move. Okay, just the economic environment just didn't support it. There was no way to do anything. I couldn't make a move. I kept preparing. The interesting thing is, the pendulum swung. Things changed. We had a president. I'm not making a political observation, so I don't want to freak anybody out here. I'm just telling you what the world was like for me. Some actor named Ronald Reagan became the president. And I remember sitting in my car, listening to his inauguration speech, and I knew what I had to do. I knew that the world was about to change, and it did in a very, very big way. I won't bore you with all of this, except to maybe dwell a little bit on that part about the dramatic increase in national security priorities. Okay? He wanted to have a 600-ship Navy. He wanted to have something called the Strategic Defense Initiative. Any of you heard about that? Any of you at all? Anybody raise some hands? No? They called it Star Wars. It was to create basically a shield defense of the United States against nuclear attack instead of having mutually assured destruction. So the prevailing idea about fighting the Soviet Union was to make sure they wouldn't attack us, for them to make sure we wouldn't attack them, because nobody could launch their missiles without the other side launching a counterattack. Reagan's idea was the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was to basically create kind of like an anti-ballistic missile system, okay, where we'd be able to detect incoming missiles and shoot them down. I'm not here to talk about whether that was a good idea or a bad idea. or even whether or not that was technically feasible with the state of computer technology in the 1980s. But I sure can tell you, it was a gold mine of opportunity for people in the aerospace business. There were going to be a lot of programs, and that's where I want to take you next, to understand a little bit about this thing. What is that? Anybody have any idea what they're looking at? Anybody at all? That is one copy of a proposal. A proposal. What's a proposal? Any guesses what a proposal is? It's the foundation of how things work in the aerospace and defense industry today and back then. So here's how it works. Let me explain this. There were a raft of government contractors in the 1970s, actually 23, that were considered to be prime contractors. They were called prime contractors because when the government issued a contract, they'd be in charge of that contract. There'd be a bunch of subcontractors, but there would be one prime contractor. That was the point contractor for a program. Everything that the federal government does that has stuff, they buy. The government doesn't make an aircraft carrier, they buy it. They don't make ships, they don't make satellites, they don't make missiles, they don't make airplanes, they make nothing. They hire contractors to do all of that. So the question is, how do they do that? How do you pick a contractor? How do you even get a contract? A lot of people think, well, you know, Lockheed or Boeing or whomever, they just get the contract because that's what they do. All of these contractors had to compete for those contracts, every contractor. Even today, we're in an environment where we have 6 what are now called super primes. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, BAE, so forth. The point is, how did they win those contracts? How did they prepare these proposals? During the 1970s, I had found myself in an unusually large number of situations working on proposals. And what I found was that everybody sucked at it. That sucked, seriously sucked at it. They were awful. The technology didn't exist. We didn't have Macs. We didn't have laptops. We didn't have any of the tools that we have today for preparing proposals. We had drafting boards. We had typewriters. We had, scissors and Scotch tape to manufacture a proposal. But it was a Herculean management effort to get all of these people together to produce these things. I had a better idea that came out of my own experience that this was not how to go about this. By the way, I should tell you, the best contractor in the business at the time, which was Lockheed, the best win rate in the business, which was Lockheed, was 20%. 20%. That was the best. That meant they were losing 4 out of 5 times. This is just, you would think this would be unsustainable, but it was built into the system. This is a proposal that I managed a few years later. To give you an idea of what's at stake here, this is one copy of a proposal to replace the solid rocket motors on the space shuttle. In 1985, the Space Shuttle Challenger, of course, blew up because of a failure in the O-rings on the solid rocket boosters. And the whole space program came to a grinding halt while NASA figured out what to do about that. And so there was a proposal effort, hotly contested. I ended up managing the proposal effort for what was the Lockheed Aerojet team. It took 350 people and $35 million, 3 months, in a 35,000 square foot warehouse to make that. And that is the technical approach, the design, the manufacturing facility, all of the program management, all of the finances around that. That's $3 billion in 1988 dollars. Pretty big deal. I've worked on a lot bigger jobs. I did the Space Station Freedom for McDonnell Douglas. I did the Joint Strike Fighter program, which became the F-35 for Lockheed Martin. I've worked on 21 of the 30 largest procurements to occur in the last 35 years. Okay, this is a big deal. I started a business that worked with those aerospace and defense contractors to win programs. Now, how that happened, very interestingly, you like the way I'm telling this now? Yeah? Okay. The way this happened was that the phone call came. I was sitting in my office. I was a VP at a division of L'Oreal in San Diego. I had a pile of employees. I had a pretty good job. At that point, in 1981 dollars, I was making about $65,000 a year. That, would probably be 5 times that today, 10 at least, maybe 10 times that today. So I was making pretty good money, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't moving the needle on my economic situation. A friend of mine called me on the phone. He said, Steve, I'm at General Electric, Valley Forge. You've heard of General Electric. Well, they used to be one of those 23 prime contractors. I'm at General Electric Valley Forge. We're working on this proposal to this new government agency created to provide direct broadcast satellite services to the rural part of America. So that system we have, DSS now, was originally something created by the government because they couldn't get cable into rural America. Okay? They're competing with Hughes for this proposal effort. He says, it's a complete train wreck. We're going down in flames. I need you to come out here and sort us out. I said, I have a day job. He said, what are you making for 1981? I said, well, maybe 65K. He said, how about $13,000 to come out for 2 weeks? Yeah, okay, I could do that. I took emergency leave for a couple of weeks, went back to GE, spent 2 weeks back there, sorted it all out, because I had been thinking long and hard about this problem, about how to better organize, lead, manage proposals, produce a better product, improve the win rate. In 2 weeks, I had that thing completely reorganized, and everyone was essentially working for me now. And then I'm packing my bag to leave because my 2 weeks are up when the GE vice president comes in, sees me packing, turns white and says 6 more months at the same rate. So that's the launch right there. Okay, up 2 weeks, sure, anybody can do that. They're going on vacation. But now, okay, I'll be back Tuesday. I need to go quit my job. I need to go tell my wife I won't be seeing much of her or my kids for the next 6 months, and I need to come back, and that's how it worked. Okay, I took the red eye home every Sunday night to Philadelphia, and then flew home every Friday afternoon, and I did that for 6 months. Okay, anybody know what the math is on 26 weeks at $6,500 a week? I think it's a pretty good number. And that's how, but more importantly than that is that's what allowed me to prove that I could move the needle, that I could actually improve client performance, I could make the difference, okay, and I could make money doing it. So my point here is that preparation leads to opportunity, and if you have the courage, you're going to launch. You're going to do it. You're not going to ask anybody's permission, especially your spouse. They're not interested in that. Okay, you're going, this is all on you as an entrepreneur. And I can't tell you that there wasn't collateral damage. Okay, my wife and I ended up getting divorced over this. It was what I had to do. Now, I can't tell you that I had some grand vision at this point. It was, a gig at a time. When I finished the gig at GE, the next thing I knew I was at Lockheed. And I finished the gig at Lockheed, and they wanted more, and I ended up at McDonnell Douglas and at Rockwell. And I ended up, because I could get results, and because these people all teamed together, if I was at McDonnell Douglas working on a gig, there was for sure somebody from Lockheed working on the gig who went back and told them, this guy knows how to do this. He knows how to move the needle. And by the end of the 1980s, I realized what I had created, that this indeed was my inspired life purpose. I can't say I knew that at the time when I started. I thought my inspired life purpose was to be an astronaut, to be a pilot. That's what I cared about. That's my passion. I've been flying 53 years, but that's not my business. What happened was I was able to do these 6 things. Now you tell me if this isn't a going concern. I have exceptional expertise that gives me insight that most others can't have. And by the way, I want to emphasize something. This is not today. This is the 1980s. We don't have an internet. Information is the hardest thing to come by. Today, information's ubiquitous. Having information doesn't buy you any kind of an advantage at all. Then, information was everything. Most people had no idea what was going on. I had the inside knowledge on what was going on virtually every program going on in the country. Okay, in every major agency in the government, all the NASA centers, all the military services, the intelligence community, I knew about every procurement that was going on in the country. And so I knew how to pick my spots where I could have an impact. And I had to go to the B team, right? I'd call them up, whoever was in charge of the B team, and I'd say, I'd like to come down and talk to you about working with you on the XYZ deal. At first, they'd say, why would I want to talk to you? And then I'd tell them, and they'd say, can you see me this afternoon at 2? Okay. I could never get the A team to hire me. It was always the B team. Because the A team didn't think they needed me. The A team thought the deal was theirs to win. What do you think happened? Any ideas? The B team won all the deals. That's what disruption really looks like. McDonnell Douglas ceased to exist as a corporation because it lost the Joint Strike Fighter to Lockheed when it thought going in that there was no way it wouldn't win. They were the only company that had ever built a fighter, right? Other than Lockheed, which had bought the F-16 from General Dynamics, and everybody hated it initially because it was a single engine fighter. They loved the F-15, right? They loved the F-18. Those are the big time line fighters for the Air Force and the Navy. I moved the needle. And that's really what it's about. If you're you just can't make it happen. You can't come in, present a few slides and a presentation, and that's going to move the needle. Moving the needle is being effective at leadership. It's having processes, tools, and standards, and getting your client to embrace them when it's not how they do business. Can you imagine that? I started out at GE. I was the youngest guy in the room taking, a room full of people who were 10, 20 years older than I was and getting them to change their paradigm about how we were going to do this. Incredible. It's the most arrogant thing I can imagine, but that's what it took. And the only reason it worked is they believed me because I actually knew what I was talking about. You get bottom line results for a client, guess what? That turns into relationships. And relationships turn into increasing demand. And that's what happened. That was my story of the 1980s, but it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because of the macroeconomic environment that I was operating in, which was the 1980s. A decade earlier, never going to happen. A decade later, I wouldn't have had the credibility for what happened next. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Because what happened in the 1990s? The Cold War ended. Soviet Union collapsed. I must be out of business, right? I mean, do you realize that all of the federal funding in the 1990s, what they call DDTR&E, that's Design, Development, Test, Research, and Engineering, that's the bucket of money in the military parlance, in federal funding parlance, where the money comes from to pay for all this. It dropped in half, went from $130 billion to $65 billion between 1990 and 1995. What do you think happened to my business as that crash was going on? They were seeing all that money drop in half. What do you guys think happened to my business? Any guess by anybody? What do you think? Yes, sir.
Competition for the contracts increased, and so they needed the expertise to make sure that they were winning the contracts as opposed to anything else.
You all hear that? That's an A student right there. That's what an A student looks like. That's exactly what happened. The competition went up. Winning mattered more than ever. Okay? It was the biggest food fight you've ever seen. Yeah? Let me show you what that looked like. It took me from 1982 to 1989 to get just under $3 million in revenue. Now, okay, multiply that by 5 today for inflation. But think about that. But then look what happened. My compounded annual growth went to 44% for the next 10 years, while the customer environment was dropping in half. 1997, we did 32 million. 1998, going into the year, we had projected we'd be doing about 40. That's when we went public. Did our IPO. Day one NASDAQ listing in January of 1998 was $180 million on the back of $40 million in revenue. It was a bubble. You can't say no to that kind of situation. You have to do it, right? So I was chairman and CEO for the next 10 years. I wish we had time to go into what that journey was like. That'd be another 30 slides. I went from being an enormously successful entrepreneur to a struggling CEO, ultimately successful CEO, but I stepped right into a buzzsaw. The dot-com crash came. Our stock went from $24 a share to $1 in the dot-com crash. Next thing I'm getting a call from the banks. They want to have lunch. What for? Well, we want to see if we can get you to sign a guarantee on the debt. Yeah, no, that won't happen. Our revenue, we started making acquisitions. We had a fabulous enterprise. Went from just under 40 million in revenue projected to 65 million that year, and the next year 130 million. All hell broke loose. By the time the dust settled, we had gotten rid of a lot of the things we had acquired, made some, lost some won, some lost, paid off all the debt, and then grew the company back to 120 million with better margins, and sold it to private equity in 2008. So that's that story. Not too bad, huh? Oh, you want to know about, what was your win rate, Steve? How much did you move the needle? Well, we did 2,000 proposals. By the way, when I say we did the proposal, the client would bring us in to manage them through the process. We provide a core team of people. They're not experts in writing proposals, they're experts in executing programs. We're experts on how to win. So we're like there to manage the processes that we had developed, complete each of these proposal efforts. Overall, 2,000 plus proposals, $340 billion worth of work in the then contract value, initial contract value, 86% win rate. Not too bad, yes sir.
So on the first gig, right, you were hired because they wanted you to complete the project, you did it, but then how did you take the insight that you had or you developed, and then how did you replicate that and build a team?
So what happened was the first 3 years, it was just me. I hired no one, and it was me doing everything myself. And me developing the processes, me providing the leadership. So I do the management, I interface with everybody. Every aspect of this was really on me. So I worked in 3 years, 10,000 hours of direct labor. That's what that took. 10,000 hours of billed labor in 3 years. Does that sound like a big number to you guys? Yeah, it is a big number. Okay, it is a big number. A huge amount of sacrifice involved in doing something like that. I had 2 children, 2 small girls who love me to death, I might add. I had them alternating weekends and every Wednesday evening, and I had to find a way to make that happen in the middle of all of that. Let me give you guys a little life lesson since Steven's not in the room. I want to tell you about something that you probably won't hear otherwise. Any parents in this room? Any of you at all? Couple. 3, fantastic. You're all going to be parents, probably, okay? It's a biological inevitability. You're all going to be parents. But I'm going to tell you something you don't know. You're going to know those kids that you have and you raise as adults a hell of a lot longer than you knew them as children. And believe me, you're going to hear about what kind of a parent you were. You are going to hear all about it. In fact, you're probably doing it with your own parents. And they're going to relitigate every day of their childhood for about a decade with each other, trying to decide what kind of a parent you were. And then they're going to tell you. Okay, right? I see some nods. That's how it's going to be. Be a good parent. Take the long view. You're not there to be their friend. You're there to give them the tools they need to succeed in life. Okay? So know your values, follow your instincts, and you'll do great as a parent. Don't overthink it. But remember, in the long run, you're going to find yourself sitting in a conversation with your kids in their 40s who are either going to love you to death or won't want anything to do with you, right? So, just a thought. I had a second opportunity. I've had many opportunities. We talked about opportunity recognition as a key element. If you don't recognize the opportunity, there's nothing to talk about, right? But opportunities are presenting themselves all the time. It's whether or not you see it. I had an amazing, very improbable opportunity at the end of the Cold War. I got to be the first American since Charles Lindbergh in 1931 to fly an airplane from North America across the Bering Straits into far eastern Russia, into the Kamchatka Peninsula, and live to talk about it. Okay? Incredible thing. I got a little video, if you'd like to see it. It's 90 seconds, little clip from the book. So I wrote a best-selling book about that. And why the book is important is a lot of what I've talked about this morning is in the book. You could read about my experiences at the bottom of a crevasse, some tremendous vignettes about proposal wars. Okay, great stuff. By the way, all this fits together. It's routine for you. We have this global positioning system. Everybody knows about that, right? You can't make it home without it, right? Well, that global positioning system would not have existed without the rocket that put it in orbit, which would not have existed if the shuttle hadn't blown up. Okay? And McDonnell Douglas didn't win that contract for that rocket. A lot of things have happened that all tie together that find their success in the proposals that created the programs. It's really a big deal, and I talk about some of those. You remember Desert Storm, and you remember the Scud missiles, and you remember the Patriot missiles being fired. We would have had less damage if we had not fired at all than firing Patriot missiles at them, because all that did was increase the amount of debris that was raining down on wherever the missile was going. There was a program to replace that. It's called Theater High Altitude Area Defense System. I managed that. You'll read about that too. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on in that book, not just an adventure of getting to Russia and then the joint venture that I founded. Here, let's watch this. A lot of fun. Great story, by the way. It took me 10 years to write that book. We've got 30 minutes. I've got a few other things I want to share with you, but I want to see if there's any question. I want to give you a chance to get a word in edgewise here. Anything? Yes, sir. Number one, I knew the macroeconomic environment because of what was going on in 2008. I knew the market was going to crash. Interestingly, we were in the middle of the deal with private equity to buy the company when the market crashed. We already had a definitive agreement, and we closed the deal anyway. I really got lucky. If it had been 30 days later, it never would have happened. I would have been stuck with that company for another decade, operating in a macroeconomic environment that was completely unconducive. We ended up with an political administration that had a very, very different agenda. National security wasn't the priority, and that was my area of domain expertise. So I saw that coming. When they started doing subprime mortgages, did you all hear about that? Have you heard that term, subprime mortgages? This is just one of the most imbecilic ideas like ever. And there were a lot of other preposterous things going on. The way they were taking packages of mortgages and then selling off slices by order as opposed to individual complete mortgages, you'd get the last 10%, right, in line for a package of 100 mortgages, and that was being billed as a AAA quality bond. You know, that there were a lot of idiotic financial engineering going on. You knew the market was going to crash, you just didn't know when. The next decade was a very, very difficult decade for, I think, for entrepreneurship. See, that's my whole point is uncertainty has a lot of luck in it. So, and maybe we should talk for a moment about the difference between uncertainty and risk, because you may think I'm talking about the same thing, and I'm not. Risk is something you can certainly articulate. You look at any situation, there are certain risks associated with it. You're going to drive a car down the freeway, there's a risk that the brakes might fail. There's a risk the electrical power could fail. There are all kinds of risks. There's risks that somebody could come from another lane, you know, and bang into the side of you, the car in front of you could stop. These are all risks. But there are risks you can ameliorate. Okay, well, I could develop a system to beat me if the car in front of me starts to slow down too quickly, that kind of thing. Risks, you can look at it, you can characterize it. Might get the risk analysis wrong. That's what happened with the space shuttle. The reason the Challenger blew up wasn't that there was anything wrong with the Challenger. The problem was they were launching it outside its operating window. It was too cold. They never connected the dots on the fact that the rubber seals got hard, you know, in the O-ring. Risk, you can characterize. You may even be able to quantify it. Uncertainty is just that. It's the unknown of things. And when you're dealing with in entrepreneurship, it's kind of early days. That was actually why I was so good at proposals. I had a very high tolerance for ambiguity. And when you start a proposal effort for a program, you don't, you know, they think they know all the answers. They don't know any answers. Believe me, you know, they've got pictures and diagrams and they've got ideas. None of this is ready, okay? There's a huge amount of work that has to be done to convert ideas into anything that's proposable. Engineers generally hate ambiguity. They have a very low tolerance for uncertainty, and they're too quick to want to characterize things, to pick a solution. I wanted to delay picking solutions until we understood the ramifications of our options. I always found the opportunity to be in uncertainty. I like that environment. Most people hate it. Luck is certainly going to be bad luck, good luck. Mostly it's how you deal with the situation. If it's really going to come down to being unlucky, you know, that happens. That's life. One of the interesting things about this book, Crosswinds, is all of the uncertainty in it. That's what you'd get out of it. Every single page is a trip down uncertainty lane, okay? You never know. That's why people don't like to put the book down, because they're wondering, well, what's going to happen next? How is this going to get resolved? And that's what entrepreneurship is. It's solving problems. Maybe you saw The Martian. I love Mark Watney. It's science fiction, but what makes it so great is you just keep solving problems that seem insurmountable, and you solve enough problems, you get to come home. I love that phrase. I hope that answers your question. Who else wants to? Yes, ma'am. It's because I could thrive in uncertainty. Actually, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, I have some exercises that I think you might find useful. Let me just jump to that one. This actually came from a Reader's Digest article in the 70s, the 10 attributes of an entrepreneur. I think it's true today. Take a picture, think about it, make a table. Score yourself 1 to 10 in these attributes. And you'll notice, and then in the third column, what do you think you can do to improve your score? So, you know, nobody's a 10 on all of these things. It speaks a lot to your nature to ask yourself how well you do. Now, the first 5 are kind of interesting because they really have to do with your ability to lead. Okay, so these are essential leadership qualities if you're going to be an entrepreneur. You're not going to be an entrepreneur alone. You're not going to do it in a garage for very long. You have to get people to come and work for you. Why are they going to do that? Why are they going to quit their job? Why would Steve Bednick quit this fantastic job, okay, and come down and work for you and bet his career, his kids' college education, right, his retirement, his life on you? Think about that. Why would anybody do that? You better have a story. You better be all in, passionate, committed to what you're doing, and able to talk about why you're going to succeed. You have to turn, you know, the first 20 or 30 people that come to work for you are going to be absolutely critical. So they're going to be your disciples. Choose them wisely. The last 6 through 10, are really tough because they're how you lead yourself, not others. How you're going to manage yourself. High tolerance for ambiguity, that's what I mean by uncertainty. Flexibility and adaptability, you're going to be constantly changing your trajectory, right? You're going to have to make adjustments as you go based on what pesky customers say about what you're doing, right? Because you're there to service them. And you're going to have to keep at it and keep at it. Tenacity is everything. And then, of course, you're going to need a thick skin because everybody's going to hate what you're doing, right? You think everybody loved? I just told you about this unbelievably. Can you imagine the value I was delivering with this business? Can you think about that? What possible thing could you ever do for Lockheed that would provide more value than actually making the difference between them winning and losing a gazillion-dollar contract? And them knowing it was you that made the difference. It's just a mind-boggling, talk about barriers to entry. The best kind of business you can have is one with insurmountable barriers to entry. You know, I had no competition. You know, there were, a lot of mom and pop shops running around trying to do their thing because I can't do everything. And it helped me to have them compete against me because they'd get crushed every time. So, and while all this is going on, you know, I've got most people saying to me, Steve, when are you going to quit all that nonsense and get a real job? Don't you want to come and be a VP at Lockheed? Why do you want to keep doing all this? They made me 10 job offers. We couldn't get it done. And then, of course, this capacity for risk and for uncertainty. Absolutely crucial. I think that's a great thing for you to look at. I want you to think about this from your perspective if you're one of the contractors. There is a real risk of alienating a contractor because you refuse to work with them. They call you up and they say, we want you to come down here and work with us. What are you going to say? If you've already signed up with their competitor, what do you say? There's only one thing you can say. I can't work with you. I already signed up with your competitor. I feel really bad about that. Please don't be mad at me. You should be mad at yourself. Because if you actually cared, you would have called me 2 weeks ago. Right? I could only work with one of the competitors on any given deal. That's sort of a core value. Think about that as an integrity issue, as a core value issue. I'm going to tell you a story that'll show you how this plays out that you'll love. And so what I had to do is very carefully train my customers to call me earlier. And they were constantly in a battle with each other to see who would call first. They tried all kinds of strategies to take us out. One company tried to buy us. Another company wanted us to be exclusive with them for a whole raft of things. You can't give us a deposit to be on your unpaid reserve. It doesn't work like that. You're either hiring us, we're coming in, we're doing our thing. And these were multi-million-dollar contracts, right? These weren't like for a few grand. These are big contracts because I'm delivering a lot of people, a lot of labor, doing a lot of work here. Here's where I'll just use Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas as a proxy. I'd have a team at Lockheed working on Project A. I'd have a team at McDonnell Douglas working on Proposal B, Proposal A, Proposal B. Different proposals for different customers, but in the same facilities, maybe even across the hall from, each other. Each team isolated. It knew the rules, a lot of training in my company. We did a lot of training. You didn't just come and work for my company. Though you had to go to school. We had SM&A University. It was a 2-week program to go through all of the details about how they had to conduct themselves, how things worked. Pretty good. But sometimes you learn information, especially me, who's coming down and looking at high-level reviews of their work products. You end up knowing things that turn out to have a bearing. I may have learned something at McDonnell Douglas that turned out to have a bearing on Lockheed's strategy on Proposal A. Now what? Now what? So this is where integrity is everything. So this actually happened where Lockheed was working on a very important proposal to them, and I'm in a strategy review meeting, and the president of Lockheed Corporation is in the meeting. That's how big a deal this is. And he's getting a briefing, and I'm there, and I'm hearing the briefing from their marketing people on what they think another contractor is doing that is going to have a bearing, big bearing, on what they're doing. And is the difference between them winning and losing. And I know that they're wrong. I know that they're wrong because I know what that contractor is doing, and it isn't that. My COO and I excuse ourselves from the meeting. We go out on the hallway. We have a 3-second conversation which say, we can't tell them. We can't tell them. It's not our information. That is proprietary to the other company. We can't share that information. Lockheed proceeds to lose. And within 30 minutes, I'm getting a phone call from the president of Lockheed. How do you think that call went? 2 words, you knew. That's exactly right. Another A student. I picked up the phone. Yes, sir? You knew we were wrong. 4 words. Yes, sir, I did. And you didn't tell us. No, I couldn't. He said, I used to think all of that posturing of yours about integrity was bullshit. It's not. You just proved that you live by your core values. They loved us. They respected that we did the right thing for the right reasons, and I got to breathe again. I mean, I wasn't sure how this phone call was going to go, but we got a lot of business from Lockheed after that. It became a legendary story in the company. Yeah? Yes, sir. Oh, well, in 1992, when I flew to Russia, the CIA knew all about it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, you can't believe what that how that whole thing went down. They were helping me. So what we did was we converted the military air base at Petropavlovsk into an international cargo refueling base. That was sort of phase one. We needed to get cargo aircraft. We were refueling hundreds of wide-body cargo aircraft that were transiting from Malaysia, Southeast Asia, into North America. And we were better positioned as a fuel stop than either Narita, or Seoul. And it made a big difference. It actually eliminated an extra fuel stop for these cargo carriers. Super competitive, really big deal. Got to read the book to see how that all plays out. But we couldn't have done it without the cooperation of the FAA and the International Civil Aviation Organization. And I mean, I had everybody on the payroll. I had the CIA guys on the payroll, I had the KGB guys on the payroll, which became the, and the militia, our own people. It was really kind of an interesting problem in diplomacy. And I'll tell you what the key to it working was: total transparency. So the real challenge was to make sure nobody would get mad because they were surprised and they learned something, that they didn't, or thought they learned something that wasn't to their liking. So our big challenge was to communicate with everyone. And by the way, everybody's reading our mail. Still no internet. We're using faxes, Twixes, things that you never have even seen, that were horrendous, labor-intensive communications medium. But everybody was reading it. NSA, CIA, the FSB, everybody's going to read what we're writing, okay? And our challenge was to write things in a way that they could not misunderstand. That was the key. Don't keep any. The key is don't have secrets. That's the key. If you have secrets, make sure everybody knows absolutely everything. Okay, and it worked pretty well. Yeah, it does, Chris, but maybe not in the way that you're thinking of, because, if necessity is the mother of invention, desperation is the midwife, is what I think. And so I was in really bad financial condition by 1981. And inflation just was a killer. It's like the worst of the worst thing that can happen. I'm so hopeful that this will get mitigated in short order, but maybe not. What you're going to have to do is the calculus on what the risk is of you trying to launch an entrepreneurial venture in this kind of an environment. I don't even know how to move money around. I can't even make a decision about what to sell or what to buy. I don't know what you're going to do. It's a very difficult challenge right now. And the more wealth you have to work with, the more difficult it becomes. I mean, I basically wasn't going to say no to an opportunity that could move the needle. Okay, and if I failed, I failed. I wasn't going to be any worse off than I was. That's what I'm talking about. Well, today, it'd be a very different story. You can make a mistake if you have wealth, that is going to move the needle in the wrong direction. I've had a lot of fun in my life. I don't want to, guys to see me as a two-dimensional kind of a entrepreneurial maniac. I've had 3 wives, I've had 4 kids, I've got 7 grandkids. I have competed in 75 ballroom dance competitions. Pretty decent golfer, okay. That's the closest I ever came to a hole-in-one. Fabulous skier. Love horses, love it up in Montana, love to fly. I got a lot of things that I like to do. I like to have a good time. The key here that I want to get across to you is that you want to make time for fun along the way. You know, the idea that you're going to work hard and then suddenly in 60 or 70 years you're going to, you know, you're going to have a great time of it, doesn't work like that. You know, I'm 76. I'm a pretty fit guy. Okay, I know that's a shock to you. How could that possibly be? I'm vertical, but you know, I didn't get to be in the condition I am now because I just decided last year to start working out. You've got to have a program. Start early. Adopt the program now while your bodies are flexible, and it'll pay off for you in the long run. That's my big advice. You're going to need to be fit for the war ahead. You're going to be busy. Take care of yourself.
Passion is coming into this class.
Thank
Steve,
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure.